The winter of 1944 did not arrive with a bang, but with a deceptive, suffocating silence. By December, the Allied High Command had succumbed to the most dangerous of all military ailments, hubris. They believed the German war machine was a shattered relic, incapable of anything beyond a desperate, localized defense. In the plush hotels of Paris and the reinforced bunkers of SHAF, the talk was of the war's end by Christmas. The Ardennes forest, a rugged expanse of dense timber and narrow winding roads, was considered a quiet sector, a place to rotate exhausted divisions or blood-new, inexperienced ones. It was known as the Ghost Front, a stretch of 80 miles held by just 6 divisions. But beneath the canopy of the Ardennes, the silence was a mask. Adolf Hitler, retreating further into a world of maps and delusions, had conceived of a plan so audacious it bordered on the suicidal. Operation Watch on the Rhine was not designed to merely halt the Allied advance, but to sever it entirely. The goal was to strike through the thin Allied line, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and trap for Allied armies in a pocket. It was a gamble of such staggering proportions that his own generals, men like Rundstedt and Model, argued against it. They saw the reality of their dwindling fuel reserves and shattered industry. Hitler saw only the potential for a political miracle that would force a negotiated peace. The systemic failure of Allied intelligence in the weeks leading up to December 16 remains one of the great ironies of the conflict. The Allies possessed the ability to decode German high command transmissions, but they were blinded by their own assumptions. Because they believed the Germans were incapable of an offensive, they interpreted every scrap of evidence to fit that narrative. German radio silence was viewed as a sign of collapse rather than preparation. The massive movement of trains and troops was dismissed as reinforcements for the Eastern Front or a defensive build-up. The Allies were looking at the enemy through the lens of their own success, failing to realize that a cornered predator is at its most lethal when it has nothing left to lose. On the morning of December 16, at 5:30, the silence of the Ardennes was obliterated. 2,000 German guns opened fire simultaneously, a volcanic eruption of steel that tore through the pre-dawn fog. This was the opening note of a symphony of chaos. The barrage was followed by the eerie glow of searchlights reflecting off the low clouds, creating an artificial moonlight that guided the first wave of German infantry. The Americans, many of whom were still in their sleeping bags, woke to a world that had literally caught fire. The psychological shock was immediate and profound. The Ghost Front had become a graveyard in a matter of minutes. The tactical disasters began to mount as the German 5th and 6th Panzer Armies surged forward. In the center of the line, the 106th Infantry Division, a green unit that had only been in the line for days, found itself bypassed and surrounded on the heights of the Schnee Eifel. Within 72 hours, 2 of its 3 regiments would surrender in one of the largest mass capitulations in American military history. This was a failure of leadership and communication on a systemic level. The high command in the rear refused to believe the scale of the breakthrough, leaving thousands of men to be swallowed by the German tide while they waited for orders that never came. While the 106th was being dismantled, another horror was unfolding near the crossroads of Malmedy. Kampfgruppe, the tip of the SS spear, was fueled by a fanatical desperation and a total disregard for the laws of war. When they encountered a convoy of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, the result was a massacre. Over 80 American prisoners were gunned down in a frozen field, their bodies left to be covered by the falling snow. This atrocity would serve as a grim catalyst for the American soldier. Word of the massacre spread like wildfire through the ranks, turning a confused retreat into a hardened, vengeful resistance. The Germans had intended to spread terror. Instead, they had forged a collective resolve that would haunt them for the rest of the campaign. Yet, even as the center buckled, the German plan began to fray at the edges due to the unrecognized actions of small, isolated units. At the Elsenborn Ridge, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Division staged a defense of such ferocity that it derailed the entire northern wing of the German offensive. The 6th Panzer Army, Hitler's primary strike force, found itself bogged down against a wall of American fire. These were the unsung heroes who fought in squads and platoons, holding narrow defiles and blowing bridges just as the first German tanks appeared. They were the grit in the gears of the German machine, proving that tactical brilliance at the top means nothing if the soldier in the foxhole refuses to move. The town of St. Vith became another vital bottleneck. For nearly a week, a ragtag collection of units, including the 7th Armored Division, held this crucial rail and road hub against overwhelming odds. By the time they were forced to withdraw, they had shattered the German timetable. In a war of movement, time is more precious than fuel, and the Germans were losing both at an alarming rate. The narrow, icy roads of the Ardennes were not built for the massive King Tiger tanks, which frequently broke down or ran out of gasoline, becoming multi-ton roadblocks that stalled miles of reinforcements behind them. Then there was Bastogne. The encirclement of the 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored at this strategic crossroads has become the stuff of legend, but its historical significance lies in the systemic failure of the German logistics. The Germans could surround Bastogne, but they could not take it. General Anthony McAuliffe's one-word response to the German demand for surrender, nuts, was more than just a defiant gesture, it was a testament to the shifting momentum of the battle. The defenders of Bastogne were cold, hungry, and low on ammunition, but they were an anchor that the German wave could not dislodge. While the 101st held the center, General George S. Patton was performing a feat of military logistics that remains unparalleled. Informed of the crisis, he turned his entire Third Army 90 degrees in the middle of a winter storm and raced north to relieve the besieged town. This was the moment the strategic tide truly turned. The German offensive, which relied on speed and the continued absence of Allied air power, was now being squeezed from the south. The systemic rigidity of the German command structure, which forbade any retreat or adjustment of goals, began to work against them as the American response grew more fluid and aggressive. The weather, which had been Hitler's greatest ally by grounding the superior Allied air forces, finally broke on December 23. As the fog lifted and the skies cleared, the full weight of the Allied war machine was unleashed. Thousands of sorties were flown, turning the German supply lines into a smoking ruin of twisted metal. The German panzers, some of the most formidable weapons of the war, were reduced to stationary targets. They had reached the limit of their endurance. The miracle Hitler had promised his people had vanished in the cold, clear light of a winter morning, leaving behind a trail of destruction that stretched back to the Rhine. The final weeks of the battle were a grim process of erasing the Bulge. It was a period of attritional warfare in sub-zero temperatures, where frostbite claimed as many victims as shrapnel. The Germans, having spent their last reserves of men and material, were forced into a slow, agonizing retreat. By late January, the lines had returned to where they had been on December 15. But the cost was staggering. The Americans suffered over 75,000 casualties, while the German losses were even higher and, more importantly, irreplaceable. The Ardennes had become a charnel house that consumed the last of the Third Reich's military strength. The historical irony of the Battle of the Bulge is that it may have actually shortened the war, though not in the way Hitler intended. By drawing his best remaining divisions out of their defensive fortifications and into the open, he allowed the Allies to destroy them in a single, massive engagement. The systemic failure was not just in the intelligence of the Allies or the logistics of the Germans, but in the very idea that a single stroke of military genius could reverse the tide of history. The battle proved that the modern war of industry and attrition is won not by the boldest gambler, but by the side that can endure the most mistakes. As the snow melted in the spring of 1945, it revealed the true scale of the tragedy. Thousands of bodies were recovered from the woods, many still clutching their rifles in frozen foxholes. The unsung heroes of the Ardennes were the men who stayed when everything told them to run, who fought for a few yards of frozen dirt because they knew the man next to them was counting on it. Their sacrifice ensured that the gamble of a tyrant failed, and that the path to the heart of Germany remained open. But the scars of the Ardennes would remain, a haunting reminder of the thin line between victory and catastrophe. The philosophical takeaway of this titanic struggle is found in the resilience of the human spirit against the backdrop of systemic collapse. It is a story of how arrogance can blind the powerful, and how the courage of the ordinary can bridge the gap left by the failures of the extraordinary. The Battle of the Bulge was the last gasp of a dying regime, a violent, bloody coda to a war that had already been decided in the factories and the hearts of millions. It stands as a testament to the fact that even in the darkest winter, the light of resolve can still be found, buried deep beneath the snow and the silence of the woods. In the end, the Ardennes remains a quiet place once more. The narrow roads are paved, the forests have regrown, and the craters have been filled. But if you stand in the silence of those woods on a cold December morning, you can almost hear the echoes of the barrage and the clatter of the tracks. You can feel the weight of a history that was forged in the ice and the fire. It is a place of ghosts, a place of lessons, and a place where the world was saved by men who were simply told to hold the line, and did so until the very end. The lights of Europe did not go out in the winter of 1944. They flickered, they dimmed, and they were threatened by a shadow of immense proportions, but they held. The systemic failures that led to the breakthrough were corrected by the tactical brilliance of the few and the dogged persistence of the many. As the final artillery shells fell silent and the last of the German tanks ran dry, the path to peace was finally clear, paved with the sacrifice of those who stood their ground when the world seemed to be falling apart around them. Their story is not just one of military strategy, but of the enduring power of the human will to overcome the impossible.